Welcome to the Golden Shadow. My name is Arran Rogerson.
And I'm Alyssa Polizzi.
Today we're exploring the concept of ritual. And this is a big topic because it ties into a lot of the things we think about when we think about religion and spirituality and doing things like psychedelics and going to Burning Man or going camping or any kind of experience often that we view as being incredibly meaningful, something that we want to do again and again and again, or something that makes sense as a ceremony or celebration or a coming together in our lives that we want to do routinely. And this concept is vague because when we try to define what a ritual is, it's hard. What are all the things that rituals have in common? There's so many different kinds of rituals. What does it mean to engage in a ritual activity? What's the point of it? What are we trying to accomplish when we try to ritualize something?
Well, it's an interesting point you bring up because how do we define ritual? I think for some, they might jump to rituals of religion,
Certainly.
like cultural rituals, things that feel sort of imbued with a lot of depth of meaning and symbolism. But there's a lot of kind of everyday rituals or rituals that we take for granted, you know, like the celebration of a birthday every year in a very particular way.
Right.
You know, like that's a ritual. The way that we wake up and get ourselves kind of ready for the day and, you know, always sitting in this certain space in your living room with the sun coming in and drinking your hot tea and like feeling like if you didn't have that, you know, like your day's kind of off, like these everyday rituals that we have as well.
Right.
So what is a ritual? There's a spectrum, this sort of scale of it, you might even say, where we step into it in sometimes really conscious ways and other times maybe less conscious ways.
Right. We use the word ritual to describe a lot of different things. And I think they all have something in common, but sometimes they seem sort of like disparate things where it's like those aren't related.
Right.
So like you said, sort of like the morning ritual.
Yeah.
It's like, is ritual the right word for that?
Yeah.
I think it is, but is it the same as erecting a Christmas tree and putting presents underneath it and waking up on Christmas morning and opening presents? That's a ritual, but that's kind of different, right?
Right. Or like the ritual of the first communion. You know, it's like everyone's going to church and there's this big thing that's happening. It's like, that's pretty different than just getting up and having your coffee.
Right. So going to church on Sundays definitely is a very, you know, pervasive, well-known ritual that a lot of people who've grown up in the West probably have engaged in as children, or at least know someone who has. And those things are traditional. They've been around for a very long time. And so there's all these rituals that we've inherited from the past, right? And often we're not even sure why they exist. What's the point of this ritual? Why do we do this? But that's also different than, you know, say every Halloween you and your friends do drugs. And that's just sort of the ritual that you engage in. It's like, this is our Halloween celebration. It's like we go into the woods and take LSD. That's a ritual that we do. It's like, is that the same as going to church on Sundays? And it's like, well, how are they related?
Yeah.
There's other things like ritual sacrifice that people think of, like this sort of stereotype of like, you know, killing an animal to offer something to the gods or something like that. There's praying towards Mecca 5 times a day. There's Ash Wednesday. People have the mark on their foreheads and you see it. And there's all these questions of what are these things? What's the point? And we can feel it when we engage in a ritual. There's something that's very meaningful often in a lot of rituals we do. It seems to kind of bring up something that feels important or remind us of something or reinforce something within us. But there's other rituals that feel meaningless. And it's like, why are we celebrating Thanksgiving? why? You know, I'm a 5-year-old kid and I don't get it. I think it's stupid. It doesn't feel meaningful to me. I hate talking to all these adults. I think Thanksgiving is stupid. It's a stupid ritual. And so that's another question too, is like, when you have a ritual that means something, why does it mean something? When you have a ritual that doesn't mean something, why does it not mean something?
Yeah.
Are there rituals that might feel meaningless but are important and you just don't understand why they're important? There's all these questions that come up with this concept.
Well, you're bringing up a point that I feel is maybe something to get into a little bit, which is like, what is the difference between ritual and tradition? Because they're very interwoven together, but there's sort of a difference between like, there is like a tradition of this holiday, Thanksgiving as an example, like we're just about to go into that tomorrow as we're recording this. So there's this tradition that we have, and it's based around these set of rituals, you might say, that have been passed down over time within this group, within a society.
Yeah.
And it holds all of this symbolic meaning. And so the tradition, I think, in some ways, like holds the, the teachings itself. And then the ritual is more of like the enactment of it. And they need to be, in some ways, carried together. And when we lose, the reasons behind the tradition, the ritual just seems like totally meaningless.
Right. So we're tapping into a few ideas here that I think rituals have in common, maybe. And there's something having to do with meaning, right? Rituals provide access, let's say, to like a hidden world of meaning often. There's something that is engaged within us with certain rituals where we feel something, or it seems, like I said, seems important, or reinforces, or it reminds you of something that's important. Where the ritual of Thanksgiving, maybe it reminds you of the importance of family and the importance of gathering around a table and sharing food, and that's something that maybe people don't actually engage in enough anymore because we're so atomized in our lifestyles, and maybe the family doesn't get together very often, and maybe my parents are across the country and I don't see them. And then you have this ritual of coming together for a feast, and you're reminded, wow, this stuff's really important, and I had forgotten that. And so there's something that about that reminder or that reinforcement of a concept or an emotion or an ethos, you might say, that's part of what rituals can do, I would say.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, I think, in a very powerful way, getting us in touch with like the meaning making machine in our psyche, like whatever that is within us, where we find meaning in things or we get connected to those sources. Ritual has this like fast track to that. As an example, like I journal pretty often, like, when I'm really in my groove, like I'm doing it daily. Yet there's something particularly powerful when I make a ritual out of it, like one night a month. I'm going to light some candles. I'm going to, set the room up in a certain way. I'm going to light sage. I'm going to, have maybe a certain track playing. I'm creating a container. And what I do within that hour might feel more meaningful and more connective to me than when I just kind of like roll out of bed and might meditate a little bit and then do some journaling. It's just there's something about ritualizing even a simple act that seems to imbue it with meaning and connect us to something deeper. It sort of just shifts the psyche in this really interesting way. And then we see that kind of compounded on itself when you have ritual being performed by many people who are coming together, and they're all sort of giving little pieces of meaning making into a collective shared sort of sphere of it. And I think that's why holidays can feel so powerful, or why religious rituals can feel so powerful, or God, like any other rituals that we do as a community or politically, socially, etc. There's something, it's like something is in the air when that happens.
Yeah. I feel like I have to acknowledge this noise that I think is pretty audible in the recording right now, which is our neighbors essentially are watering the plants outside. And in case you're wondering, if you hear that kind of like that's what's going on, and we were aware of it. But,
yes, we've always got some sort of fun noise that we have to explain.
Yeah, I think I guess maybe the last episode or 2 episodes ago, you could definitely hear
the lawnmower.
Well, there's the lawnmower that was a while ago.
The guitar playing.
And there was a guitar playing 2 episodes ago. Our roommate was playing guitar, and I think the riff that he was playing was actually pretty audible in the recording.
Well, hopefully the audience enjoys it. What are we going to hear this week? They might ask themselves.
Yeah, I wish it actually had to do with the topic we were discussing. And we could relate
you could just hear
back.
like this like ritual hymn in the background, like it's like if we're in a cathedral. It honestly would be really cool.
That would
probably very
be
distracting.
pretty cheesy, I think. And there would also be like a lot of questions about like how is that just pre-recorded and they're just injecting it into the podcast?
Yeah, I guess that'd be
or
pretty
are they
cheesy.
actually in a church somehow? But I think there's room for this podcast to get cheesier. I'm into that idea.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to what we were talking about.
Anyways.
Something that I think is important to bring up when we talk about ritual is this idea of the sacred, right?
Yeah.
And sacred as a word, I think it's something that's become kind of trivialized and maybe even silly sounding. Like the whole idea of something being sacred is something that people, I think, often laugh at. Of like, well, that's just superstition, or like that's not necessary, or
like we should protect this ritual because it's sacred. You mean like that?
like that. But just the idea of things being sacred is something
Yeah.
that I think we're not very in touch with anymore. And maybe a lot of people actually are, and especially I think a lot of people who are really in tune with some sort of religious lineage definitely have this idea of the sacred.
Practice.
Yeah, but the whole idea of rituals consecrate something, perhaps. And what you're describing is a ritual that you have for yourself. You're lighting candles. Maybe you're engaging in some sort of reflective process. You're creating a sacred space.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean for something to be sacred? And how can you make something sacred? Is that even possible? Or are there just things that are sacred and things that are not? And that might be an entire another podcast episode. But it's a vague concept, just like ritual, but it's an important part of this, right? What do we mean by sacred?
Right. Yeah, there's like this sense of sort of like venerating what we're doing, lifting it up, kind of connection with God or a higher purpose or the meaning making. We're imbuing something with a lot of depth, and I might even say, sort of from a more like a psychological perspective, that we're getting in touch with like an archetypal core, which holds a lot of that really sort of dynamic, sort of numinous, sacred energy to it. And the archetypal framework which we tap into can feel sort of worn out, I think, at times when we lose sight of the real essence of it, and we just see it as the tradition or the act without any meaning behind it. And I feel like archetypes just in general seem to really take us back to a lot of inherent meaning for us as individuals. And the enactment that ritual allows us to almost like embody archetypal dynamics. And that has this like very beautiful sacred quality to it. It's just very godlike, but it doesn't have to be religious.
So why do you think embodying this archetypal framework or something, why is that sacred, I guess, is the question.
Sure. I think it's sacred because in the deep psyche, that's oh my God, how do I even say this? Like, that's the essence almost, like, why does narrative really rule our life? Why is myth so meaningful? Why are metaphors why do they capture us? All of that kind of, to me, speaks to the archetypal framework of the psyche.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets us out of like the logical, rational brain and back to like a very true essence, this almost just like instinctive, deep quality. And when we tap back into that, often through spiritual traditions or religious traditions or something that has that same kind of quality, it feels nurturing. It's like a balm to the soul, or at least it is to me. I guess I can't speak for everybody, but it is to me. It feels like it fills me back up, or it gets me back in touch, whatever that like quality of spirit is. And I think like archetypal cores, which to me speaks to just like the nature of the human spirit, is something that is needed in our life. And so we need the sacred, we need ritual, you know, we need the archetypal flows within us. And if we don't find it intentionally, we will look for it in other places and act it out without even realizing that we're doing it.
So there's sort of like a reality to things that are sacred, like the essence of things. There's sort of like a sincerity that I feel like you're describing, and the archetypal world, or the sort of narrative relationship that we have with reality is, it's very true. It feels real. It feels like something that is like the reality behind the things we see. And in some sense, like this like sacredness has to do with that, a feeling of importance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like sacred to me implies something that needs to be protected.
Yeah.
Or something that you should not dismiss or discard very easily, or something that is constantly being forgotten or falling apart that needs to be maintained. And I think a lot of the rituals that we think of as traditional rituals are trying to accomplish that in some way.
Yeah.
This reinforcement, this reminder, or this revitalization of this important thing or concept or idea or ethos, this important thing that needs to be constantly revitalized. And a way to do that is to remind people of it. So getting together every Sunday, for instance, it's a ritual that attempts to get you to realign to the path, the Christian path, let's say. And the rituals that you engage in, they're reminders, like remember Christ, remember this way of being. This is something important. Don't throw this away. Don't forget about this. Don't discard this. And that's something that, again, I don't feel like we're very in touch with that whole idea a lot of the time nowadays, because I think we do dismiss things like that. We do dismiss things that are considered important by tradition often and say, well, why? What's the point? When in fact, a lot of these things that have been considered sacred from the past are actually there for a reason. They're there to serve us as we navigate our lives. It's like, remember this.
Right. But the tradition is in some ways failing because the symbolic meaning has been ripped from the narrative. And in this case, like if we're talking about like a religious narrative, the symbolic meaning, that special significance, the origin points that this lineage is built upon has been stripped away for whatever reason, which might be like, you know, I don't feel connected to my religion anymore because like, you know, how could, you know, Jesus have risen from the dead? That's ridiculous. It's like, or maybe we're thinking about it too literally. Maybe the teachings have fallen short in some way. We're taking it too much for that surface value rather than as like, you know, principles to help us feel connected to strengthen culture, to believe in a shared narrative and myth, you know. Instead, it's become hollow in some way. And that symbolic depth, that ritual helps us continue to like add the logs onto the fire, you know, that symbolic fire that's burning is slowly just going out. And then the tradition falters and we lose sight of what the tradition is. And I don't know, to me, that seems like part of it is that we've lost touch with what symbol really means to us, or the importance of symbols in our lives, even though we're looking for it in other places, or we're finding it in other places.
Or we've just actually lost the symbols themselves.
Yeah.
Like they're just absent.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about like your daily life, it's like, how often do you, you are like a young yin.
You don't ask me.
Not ask you, but you, the general you, it's like how often you go around and think of like symbols in your life, of like a sacred symbol, an important symbol, like the cross is, for instance, like a sacred symbol.
Sure.
People wear it around their necks, you know. But like the Nike symbol, is like, well, is that sacred? It's like maybe it's sacred to capitalism or something like that. I can see someone saying that, but anyways, this is a good example of how we could go off in a completely different tangent about this idea.
But it's valid.
It's valid. But this episode can only be so long. So rituals kind of, they're related to myth, and I think this is sort of maybe an abstract idea, but like mythology, the narrative framework, the sort of archetypal framework, is the way in which we actually experience reality, right?
Yes.
So when we hear a story, when someone tells a myth, they're actually tapping into a symbolic representation of what's real,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
it speaks to
Yes.
us. We hear the myth and we say, that's real.
Yes.
Like, that's actually more real than like my material world, like stuff and like, you know, like objects and things I own. It's like the story is more real to me.
Yeah.
And that's like the power of myth. It's how we actually interpret the world. Our lives are a story. Other people are characters in that story. We give them sort of mythological, archetypal attributes.
Yeah.
Someone in our life might play the father. Someone might play the mother. Those are pretty obvious. But someone else in our life might be interpreted as like sort of this heroic warrior, and that means something to us. And rituals, in a way, are sort of, they're enacting or embodying what myth does verbally, you might say, or what it does visually, right? A myth could be just like a movie that you watch, but like it's mostly also like a story that's told, whereas like a ritual is almost you are embodying or enacting like the same psychological patterns in some way.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been reading this great book on Greek mythology, and Hestia, goddess of the hearth, goddess of the sacrificial flame, has been someone who's like really caught my attention lately. And she's a goddess who people probably know by name, but she's really not kind of featured very commonly in like the big stories, because she was more of like a practical goddess, someone who maybe doesn't make like the mythical history books as much, but was worshipped and tended to in a way that's pretty unprecedented. Because being goddess of the hearth, her myth required a lot of specific worship that tied to a lot of practical dynamics of running a community and running a home. So as an example, you cultivated worship to Hestia in the city's mother hearth. In the center of the city, this hearth could not go out. If you were going to establish a new community, you took the coals from that mother hearth and brought it to the next one and lit that fire. So there's this sense of the eternal flame that's anchoring us in community, in domesticity.
The torch.
Yeah, well, there you go. The torch. Check out Arran's series. At the same time, in the home, we give thanks to her or sacrifice to her. She's kind of like when we say grace, it's like it's to Hestia. And the hearth in the home is so important. It's the place of sustenance. It's this life-giving quality. It gives warmth and nourishment. There's so much also time and sacrifice and energy that goes into that ritual that keeps her flame alive, which is literally like, especially if you think way before technology was advanced, to keep a fire going that you need to use all throughout the day it's really, really important. You know this if you like go camping or something like that. It's like lighting a fire, especially if you don't have, like matches or a ferro rod or something like that. It's not easy. So there's all of these particular...
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
I've tried it. Like I can't even do it.
Yeah.
I've been camping and backpacking a lot.
So you have to tend to this hearth, right? And we're tending to it for mythic reasons. We're tending to it archetypally because it's keeping us alive. Like it's serving all of these very important purposes. It's strengthening culture. It's drawing us together. It's fulfilling this kind of spiritual need. We're getting in touch with this religious quality, and it's also helping us live properly. And that all those rituals to Hestia were so important to life of the Greeks.
So this is very interesting as an example, and the idea of the fire is something that needs to keep burning. So there's kind of this really powerful symbol, right? And essentially of a torch, like that you're passing to. If someone takes the fire and they carry it to start a new village, is that how you were describing it?
Yeah.
It's like they're taking the energy of the community and they're bringing it with them into the new community, and they're doing that symbolically by carrying this fire. And
that's a ritual, right?
It's a ritual. And it's like, you don't have to do that. Just make a new fire.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, well, wait, no, this symbolism is very important.
Yes.
And that's the interesting question, is like, why is it important? It's like, well, it's enacting a metaphor. It's enacting a story. It's an embodied story. And the power of this, and you can understand why things like this would evolve, is that the power that has for a community of people is like, this reminds you of what's important, what's real. It reminds you of an important relationship between you and other people. The fire burning, you watch the fire at the center of the town and you say, that's symbolic of our energy as a collection of people.
Right.
And it's easier for me to remember that and to reinforce it and consider it important if there's a symbol that I can rally around with my psychology, essentially.
Yeah.
And you would find, I think, that if villages did this, there would be more unity in the village. There would be a shared metaphor. It's almost like a meme. It's like a cultural meme that people can rally around. And this is happening today. This happens on the internet. People rally around memes. People rally around symbols. But you're tapping into the narrative way that we relate to the world.
Yes.
And it helps you join this sort of communal contract for keeping the fire burning.
Yes.
And then passing it on to a village that's going to branch out from this one and keeping that fire burning. And we stay together because our fire keeps burning together and it's all the same fire. And so this is kind of an extreme example, right? Because like, no one alive probably has any experience of something like this. Some people do, but probably no one listening. But you can relate back this idea of the way a symbol rallies something within you or brings something into consciousness that reminds you of something important. You can see that even in something like the morning ritual, for instance, where the fact that you have a certain routine set up, it keeps you accountable to a certain way of being. And there might be even some symbolic things happening in your morning ritual. I don't really have a very good morning ritual, so it's hard for me to give good examples of that. But
well, I can
do it.
Okay, when I'm really committed, because I don't want anyone to think that it's like, oh, I've got this going all the time. But like my solid morning routine and ritual that like when I'm practicing it, I feel really grounded is get up, try not to be on my phone right away or limit it because that's a huge problem. Okay. Right. So I'm being mindful basically from the get-go. Get up, put hot water on for tea. I really, really enjoy that ritual. I don't know why. Put on the kettle, turn that on, get my tea, sit down, meditate for about 10 minutes, maybe pull a tarot card or two, and check in with myself and do some writing. What came up in the cards, write about that, or what am I feeling, or what did I dream about? And there's something particularly grounding and anchoring, and it sort of helps me be in touch with what's going on with me and in my life. At the same time, it helps me step outside of myself, and that kind of combo I find to be particularly powerful. It's grounding, but it's expansive, is what it feels like to me.
So this is something that you would do regularly.
Yes.
A morning ritual, maybe is something you do daily. And let's pretend that Alyssa actually does it every day.
Yeah.
What's happening with that is that she's engaging in all these acts, these demonstrations. They're not just purely performative, but in some sense they are kind of performative because she's reminding herself of what she needs to do in the day, maybe how she needs to prepare for the day, checking in with yourself, doing tarot, for instance. Other people might, meditate. Other people might write in their journal. They might write down their dreams. All these things, these are not convenient things to do necessarily. They're not purely for pleasure. They're not purely to make you feel comfy, though it has an effect in some ways. But the idea is that these routines, these acts, these embodied things that you do when you wake up, they actually set you up to do what you need to do for the day. And it's an attempt to combat the natural forces of entropy that would make you be too lazy to do that, or not get up on time, or not check in with yourself, not put on tea, maybe not even eat breakfast.
Right.
And all these things, these naturally, we creep in the direction of what's convenient naturally. And the morning ritual was meant to stop you from creeping towards what's convenient, stop the
Right.
dissolution of your life,
Okay.
and bring you back into a place of the path, let's say.
Yeah, I like this because it does feel like I'm keeping myself accountable.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm doing something I enjoy and that's fulfilling, but at the same time, if I'm being totally honest, like I'd rather just like keep laying in bed and like just hang out on my phone and just like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's so many mornings that I want to do that.
Yeah.
Yet doing the other thing, which is like, yeah, journaling's nice, meditating's nice, doing yoga is nice, but you know what? Like the law of entropy wants me to just like melt into my bed,
Right.
you know, and just to not do it. And when I am consistent and I am doing it daily, I do feel better.
Right. So another example might be like the family getting together to eat dinner. Like the family sits down and has dinner together every night, no phones.
Yeah.
We talk about how our day went. I don't have a family, but just an example. And again, this is something that's not necessarily convenient, right? What might be more convenient is for everyone to just like get fast food and get on their phone and just go up to their room and hang out and just do whatever feels like most convenient, essentially. And the ritual of getting together and sitting down as a family, the point of that is to combat that creep towards convenience and to remind people family's important.
Yeah.
Let's get together and eat together, and we'll cook actually.
Yeah.
And we'll have a conversation. And I know it might be easier just to skip all that, but like this is an important thing for us to do because it reminds us, it keeps us on track, it keeps us on the path. The path being maybe the good way to live or the right way to live. That's, you could have a debate about what that actually is exactly, what's right and what's wrong. But the ritual was taking aim at reestablishing what's right for you at the expense of what is convenient.
I think you and I have wrestled with this a lot because when it comes back into our awareness that our life seems sort of empty of ritual, I think we both feel upset about it.
Yeah.
And then we go, okay, we need to do something. Like we need to change this. And especially for me, I come from a pretty like tight-knit New York Italian culture that was full of ritual growing up. Religious rituals, cultural rituals.
Right. So like Catholic and Italian rituals.
Yeah.
They were kind of like intertwined maybe,
Yes.
but maybe some rituals are mostly Catholic and other rituals are mostly
Italian.
Italian.
You'd have like, midnight mass. Like, yes, all the Catholics are going to go to midnight mass.
Yeah.
It's something that I've started doing again, even though I don't really practice Catholicism nor consider myself to be very Catholic anymore. But at the same time, wanting to return to that ritual, it's like, why did my grandma find this important? Why did my family do this? Like, there are these religious rituals that I'm trying to come back into relationship with. First communion is another example, but there's cultural rituals as well. Sunday dinner is very stereotypical, but it's stereotyped because it's true. Italians are gonna like want to gather for the family dinner and cook Arran, every Sunday. I really want to cook Italian food.
Just Italian food every Sunday.
It's important to me.
It's important to me too. It's hella good. So I'm cool with the ritual.
But there was lots of other things that my family would do. And, my life story is I moved away from New York as a young kid, and then I kind of grew up sort of losing a lot of those rituals, and it's very difficult for me. It's something that sits in a place of discomfort and detachment. It doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel that sense of deeper, higher meaning. And so when it comes up, I want to cultivate it. So we've talked about it, and it's like, we need to do something about this.
Right. And it's these rituals you're talking about, they don't happen on accident, right?
No.
Which is why they melt away.
Right.
If you don't keep them up.
Yeah, you have to upkeep them.
Right. And that's what rituals kind of are. It's like there's something that you need to keep doing even though it'd be easier not to do them.
Yes.
Because they remind you of something, they demonstrate something that they might symbolically put forward a concept that's important for you to remember, or they might just put forward an emotion that's important for you to feel regularly.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe that emotion is love, or maybe that emotion is family.
Yeah.
All kinds of things like that. But the question, would be, why are these rituals so important to you? And why them melting away, let's say, why does that disturb you? What purpose did they serve?
Oh, man. Well, I think first and foremost, there's a feeling of, I close my eyes and the image that is coming to mind is like some sort of thread that connects me through time and space to all of these other people, like in my lineage.
Right. Back to Sicily.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Even further than that, it's kind of like where do these things come from religiously? Where do they come from culturally? I have a very strong relationship and a lot of connection and love and pride in those things, and the feeling of that those things are falling away, that there's a dissolution of that is alarming to me, because it makes me feel present where I am, yet connected to, the ancestors of the past.
Right.
And it makes it feel like there's a continuity between people. And I don't want to lose that continuity. I don't think we should lose that continuity at all. It needs to be cultivated. It's sacred, you might say.
Yeah.
So the feeling that might not be passed on is, I don't know, it's so instinctive to me. Like that sense of alarm is very instinctual.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of, we've been saying this already in this episode, but a lot of the rituals that people had in the past have melted away, and a lot of the notions of ritual in our lives, they're not very present, and we don't really engage in symbolic act very often. A lot of us are not religious anymore. A lot of us don't see any point in doing something like going to church, for instance. Might not even see any point in doing something like celebrating Christmas, honestly. And what's happening here, I guess, is the question. So again, there's sort of this entropy that's like melting away that which you do not upkeep.
Yes.
So if you don't hold on to these rituals, they will disappear. You have to do them routinely. You need to teach them to your children so they keep doing them, for instance.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of rituals evolved, is they were actually passed down from generation to generation. Maybe they would evolve a little bit each time, mutate, and become optimal in some way, more optimal, like the ritual might accomplish what it's trying to accomplish better.
Yeah.
And what a ritual is trying to accomplish is kind of a big question, and it has to do with all kinds of things about the past that we're probably not going to get into. But, why do rituals become hollow for people? Yeah. Why are they trivial?
Right.
Why are they meaningless? I mean, I've experienced this personally, is that I've found it very difficult for me to reason to myself that celebrating the holidays is a good thing to do, because it just doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
Christmas doesn't mean anything, and that's like a weird thing to say, but it's true.
Yeah. The
ritual doesn't make sense to me. It never made sense as a child. I kind of get it more so in the last 10 years of like, well, okay, like family is important, but like, what's up with the gifts and stuff, and what's up with Santa Claus? Like, the music, it's like, I understand Christmas music, but ultimately the Christmas celebration, as I have experienced it in my life and with other people I've met, a lot of my friends, it doesn't really mean much. And there's been this drive to want to revitalize the Christmas ritual to make it something that feels meaningful, and that reminds me of something that's important.
Well, it's interesting because the place where it should be meaningful, the place where it should be cultivated and that sort of sense of connection reinstated, which is in the home, basically, with your closest family, I think, not for all, but for some, feels hollow in nature. And maybe that's because I have to go to like my aunt and uncles, and it's like I don't talk to them for the whole year. And then and not because, we live really far away. It's just because like we're losing touch with each other. We're becoming atomized, as you've said. And there's like a fabricated feeling of let's all come together and pretend that we're close, or pretend that we like really know what's going on in each other's lives. I don't like that feeling. I would prefer instead like that they were coming over every Sunday and we're having dinner together and we're checking in and I know you. And that's why I think sometimes maybe more for us young types, I don't know, but like our friends and the gatherings we do with friends seem to almost carry more meaning than that than with our extended family.
Yeah.
Because like we're really actually plugged in with each other. I'd rather go spend the holidays with my group of friends rather than like my aunt and uncle and my weird cousin and this and that, because it's feeling disconnected, and it's hard to embody the ritual, embody the myth when it's the meaning feels totally stripped out of the whole process.
Right, that's what's tough. And there's a dynamic here that's complicated. And Alyssa and I have already kind of talked about this a little bit. And it'd be fun for us to get into it, maybe, and kind of argue about it. But not every ritual is meant to feel good, and that's part of the thing here. It's like not every ritual is aimed at being meaningful.
Sure.
And this is part of the confusion with like a lot of spiritual practices, is that like people seem to assume that like what spirituality is what makes you feel good, or if what feels meaningful to you. That's spirituality. It's seeking something that is stimulating, and often the rituals that we have engaged in, they don't feel stimulating, and so we say, well, they're pointless then. And it's like, well, are they? Because it's important to understand that like rituals are not convenient. They're not meant to be fun. They're not meant to make you feel good even. They're meant to accomplish something that's very important for your tribe or your people or your family, or something like that. That's why they evolved in the first place, I would say. And so that's something to acknowledge, is that the rituals might not be, the whole point of them is not to be like, wow, how much fun am I having with this ritual? It's like, no. Like a good example I would say is like the marriage ritual, is that there's sort of an assumption, and this has to do with the kind of individualistic and sort of narcissistic aspects of our culture, which is complicated, but like marriage, it seems like sometimes we interpret marriage as being for us. I get married because it feels good, or because I want to have a partner, and that's why I'm married, for me. And the truth is that like the marriage, in the past at least, did not evolve to serve you specifically. It wasn't meant to feel good. It was to serve the family. You get married for your children. You get married for your tribe. It's a contract that you're engaging in that helps you succeed, helps the tribe succeed, helps the family succeed. And so when you get married, and when you are married, maybe it's not like I'm having a blast like all the time. It's like, no, you're not. And you shouldn't be necessarily. You should be focused on the path. And the path is to raise a good family, make sure they succeed. That's what marriage is for. It's not for you. It's for something bigger than you. Yeah. And that's what a lot of rituals are like. But it's tough because there's rituals nowadays, I feel like, that they don't even accomplish that to begin with. It's like, I mean, marriage, for instance, like it does somewhat accomplish keeping people together, having a contract. And that's sort of why the ritual is that the entire community or the entire village like signs off on it with the wedding celebration. Sure. We sign off on your marriage and we're watching you. So like stay together basically. But people get divorced like crazy. So it's almost like, does the marriage ritual even do it, what it was meant to do in the first place? Is it a good ritual? Right. Or should we get rid of it because it doesn't actually even do what it was meant to do in the first place? Same with like funerals. Like funerals are weird. What is the point of a funeral? It's like, well, do we even know what the point is? Right. It's like to honor someone who died. It's like, yeah, okay, but like, why is it that this funeral felt totally meaningless and didn't feel like it was honoring this person at all? Right. And that's the tough question here.
I think that's what I struggle with. There's like this feeling of like this cookie cutter way that it's like, here's like and I'm not even trying to say like, it's like, death has been commodified and it's an industry.
I mean, we're trying to be delicate here because a lot of rituals are incredibly important to people and they will die for their rituals. And, so we want to be delicate here. We don't want to badmouth rituals in general. But
I mean, just like you bringing up like the funeral is really tough for me because like I really don't like funerals, and not as like a death is really tough, even though it is.
Right. It's not just you being like, this is uncomfortable and that's why I don't like it. It's almost like this doesn't seem to honor this person.
Right. Even though there can be moments of beauty and openness and honest words that are said, and it does give people a platform to do that. It's like, I don't there's something feels wrong about it,
Yeah.
where it's like, we're presented in a certain way, it's not, okay, I don't even want to say like a new tradition that has been created is what's weird. Like you're always in this kind of church and the body's dressed this way and everyone is going through the exact same actions. That's sometimes what ritual actually is. It's like a set of symbolic actions or embodiments that have been passed on. So that's okay, but then there's something within that feels hollow. And I feel like this is where I'm going to probably find it very hard to really put into words what I mean, but that something within the ritual, in this case of marriage or of a funeral, of death, feels like it's like a shadow of what it should be. And I don't know why, even though it's like, sure, you don't have to wear the garter and like toss it, have your husband take it off. And it's like, you don't have to do that dumb ritual if you don't want to.
Right.
But there's this feeling of people just kind of like, taking off the shelf, like this is what the marriage ceremony looks like. This is what the funeral is like.
Right.
And there's something uncomfortable like in my spirit that's like, I do not like this.
Right.
And I don't know what's going on. Maybe it just doesn't feel meaningful to me, and that's why. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it's complicated because what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we're going to get married and have a wedding. What do we do at the wedding? It's like, well, what do they do in movies?
Right, like these 5 things.
Okay, so I guess we'll have a cake for some reason. I'm not sure why, but that's what they do, right? And
right, maybe that's part of it. It's like the cake is a good idea, right? But why?
Yeah,
or the walk down the aisle is good, but why?
Yeah, okay, now my father is going to walk me down the aisle for some reason, and it's like, do I understand why?
Right.
And it's like, I think the father walking down the aisle makes total sense because he is giving him away, or giving her away to the groom. That makes sense, but it's like, do you actually feel that?
Right. Are you
is it
connected
actually
to it?
symbolically demonstrating
Right.
that concept to you and
Right.
to the village who is there to watch? People wearing black at a funeral.
Right.
It's like, why do we wear black? It's like, because that's what you do.
Right.
And it's like, well, okay. So does it actually accomplish honoring the dead by everyone dressing similarly to observe that they take this seriously, that the death is important, that they're sincere about it? Does it accomplish that? Yes? Question mark?
Yeah.
Would having a funeral that everyone wears whatever they want and it's a big celebration and it's like this crazy party where everyone has a really good time celebrating the life of this amazing person, would that be dishonorable? And that's a big question. It's like, I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I wish funerals were more celebrations. I don't like the feeling of just like, death is the worst thing that can happen to someone. It's like, no, death happens to everyone.
Right.
So why are we gathering in such like this like, dark, like sad way instead of celebrating? And it depends on the death and it depends on the circumstances, of course. But still, we're kind of getting into this question of like, do the rituals that used to accomplish something important still accomplish that important thing?
Right.
Or have they actually lost their purpose?
Right.
It's not just have they lost their meaning. Because if they've lost their meaning, it's like, well, does that even matter? Should they actually be meaningful or fun or feel good? It's like, that's maybe not. But should they actually accomplish what they evolved to accomplish in the first place, which was like maybe social cohesion, reinforcing a symbol or concept that you need to remember, revitalizing this structure that's so important to keeping your family intact,
Right.
Walking the path and making sure you don't fall off the path and that you get back on. All the rituals that evolved to do this are very important,
Right.
but do they still do that? And that's what's tough.
Yeah, it's like as culture, society, and individuals have evolved over time, rituals have kind of come with us, but there's been like a slow deterioration in the meaning of those rituals or, as you were saying, why they evolved for whatever purpose. And the rituals themselves need to have their own sort of process of evolution with us. And I think that's maybe part of like the problem, or they've kind of been taken from what they were and kind of stuffed into like this particular, 1, 2, 3, steps. And that in and of itself, for some individuals feels just disingenuous.
Yeah.
And it makes us like totally disengage. I don't know if we have time for this, but I think like a quick example was, you've been talking about Christmas.
Yeah.
And was it last year that you sort of started getting more into like, what is Christmas even? And kind of.
Oh, it was an experiment that in an attempt to make the Christmas ritual accomplish what I think it's actually meant to accomplish.
Yes.
I wanted to have a conversation about what Christmas is, where it came from, why it evolved in the first place as this. Mostly what I find so interesting is like this idea of like the celebration of light returning to the world.
Right. We're getting into like
the festival of lights.
Yeah.
And it's like, what does that mean? The festival of light. And getting into that actually made Christmas feel really powerful and meaningful to me of like, you're right. Christmas is sort of around the darkest day of the year.
Yeah.
And it's now the sun is going to return, and sort of like the seasonal observance is like actually really powerful.
Yeah.
And I like thinking about the whole notion of Christ as like the light bringer. And how does that concept sort of universal of like this this truth speaker bringing light to the world that has become covered in darkness and bringing it out of that darkness? It's like all that's like really interesting and meaningful to me, but it fell flat at this Christmas celebration.
Yeah.
And people were sort of like clearly like, what are you, like, what are we doing? Like, what
Why
is
aren't
this?
we singing Christmas carols?
Can't we get back to like Jingle Bell Rock and like,
Hey, I love Jingle Bell
wearing
Rock.
those stupid like paper crowns and like, getting drunk. It's like,
Right.
that's what Christmas is about. And it's like, honestly, that's not what Christmas is about for me. And it never will be.
Right.
Like, I just like,
Yeah, it was
never say never. But.
Yeah, it was an interesting experiment, and I think even just your own studies into like the connection to winter solstice and these older, this sort of like calendrical ritual of time that's happening, you know, and how important that is for us to ritualize the turning of the seasons.
Yeah.
Something I have a lot of interest in as well. How do we connect that to these more modern manifestations?
Yeah.
And how do we talk about it to, as we said, revitalize meaning into the ritual? And for some, they just, that they don't want to go there. That's not interesting to them. They want to stick with that more.
Right. So to me, like, what would a and this is tough because you got to be careful here. You don't want to just throw out stuff that you don't like. You should be really careful not to do that. Don't throw out traditions just because you think they're kind of like stupid. Do some research. But to me, if I was going to revitalize the Christmas ritual for myself, what I would like to do is have it be a night that's very quiet and dark, and all the lights are off, and there's just like one light in the center of the room, wherever you are, maybe the backyard, whatever. But there's sort of like a circle around this one light, and you're sitting and you're being contemplative about the light in the world, and it's the fact that it's maybe disappearing. It's metaphorical. I mean, even in 2020, we sort of feel as like light has receded from the world in many ways, and maybe people feel as if it's reemerging now, and sort of like the darkness is over, and it's time for the light to return to the world. But to meditate on that is really powerful. To remind yourself of how lucky you are to have this safe order that you can live in, that the light will come back, and to think about this new year that's going to happen, and how will you, have the light return into your life and embody it and carry it like a torch. So, that is a question for people at home. Yeah. Listening to this. You can try this at home, is what I wrote in the notes. But, what we're talking about is rituals are something that are really powerful. They're very important. A life without rituals is not a good life, I would say. And if you don't have rituals in your life, you're missing out for all kinds of reasons. And you're not missing out. You're not just missing out on like having fun. That's not really what I mean. It's like you're missing out on something in your life that would improve it, that would make it more meaningful, that would give you something to rally behind with people that you love. And so something that I think would be interesting to talk about is, what can you do if you don't have any rituals in your life? Yeah. What would be some steps to making your own rituals, or joining in on rituals that already exist?
Sure. Yes. I think you can start on a personal level and think about where in your life do you want to invite that in. I think the monthly ritual is really powerful. A lot of people tend to like sync that up with like phases of the moon. So like on the full moon, I will sit and do some contemplative work.
Yeah.
I will meditate. I will cook a nice meal and sit in silence and eat this or something like that. You know, I'm a particular fan of that sort of seasonal way of connecting. It helps just give even more of a symbolic dynamic to the ritual that you're doing. So on the new moon, on the full moon, or once a month on the 5th, whatever it might be, every last Friday, what do you want to do? Just give yourself one day a month to create something. And maybe you look back into the culture of your family or your society, something that still feels kind of interesting, that still catches your interest, but imbue it with some more of that dynamic symbolic meaning, like you're wanting to do with Christmas. It's like we don't throw out the tradition completely, but we're going to revitalize it. So starting in that way, making it approachable, not overdoing it, you know, once a month, every 2 months or something like that is a really nice way to get things started.
Yeah, I mean, play around with, you know, again, like once a month is a good place to start, but like play around with certain things that you might do. You might meditate, you might pray, you might journal, you might light candles, you might have a fire. These things tap into a more primordial way of being that's powerful. There's objects, symbolic objects that it's easy to be like, well, it's just a rock.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, what if the rock sort of represented, you know, a mountain that you're trying to climb? And when you look at the rock, you remember the mountain that you're climbing, and you remember that it's tough and you're suffering, but you got to keep going. And this reminder once a month could be something that actually grounds you. It centers you. It brings you back to a place of like, I remember what my life is about, and I remember what I should be doing, and all these things that I've accumulated in the last month that don't belong in my life, all this baggage, all this stuff I'm engaging in that I don't need. I downloaded this app, and I'm just like playing this game on this app now, and I don't know why I'm doing it. It's like you have a once a month time maybe to go for a cleanse and be like, I should get rid of some of the stuff that I don't need anymore. Yeah, and that's a ritual, and these things are all just trying to reinforce a kind of behavior, a concept, an emotion, trying to remind you of what's important. And you can play around with that and just set up a physical material structure that embodies those ideas and those feelings. And that's the ritual, right? The ritual is material, it's physical, it's embodied. There's objects, symbolic objects in a lot of rituals. There's things you wear. Yeah. There's a way of sitting or walking. There's music. Maybe there's a chant.
Yeah. A drink, a special ritual drink.
Maybe there's a certain way that you engage in this with other people, and you all wear ceremonial robes. It starts to sound really culty, and so, but you get the point. Is that these rituals can actually reinvigorate your life and bring you to a better place of being. And search the past, search your lineage. That's a great place to start. It's like, why not get in touch with like what pagan Scottish rituals were? It's a good place to start. Are you Scottish? I'm Scottish. Maybe I can revitalize some of those rituals and bring them back into my life and not feel like all weird because I'm like appropriating something that doesn't belong to me, or, you know, whatever. But it's something to play with, something to think about. And I think that we all stand to learn something, grow, remind ourselves of what's really important if we engage in ritual. And now it's time for a dream from a member of our audience. This is from a 29-year-old female. And here's the dream. I was walking outside on a steep sloped street with my family past a field of green grass where people were plucking the leaves off of magnolia flowers and making lawn chains or necklaces with them. We descended into a rounded, brightly lit, whitewashed tunnel wide enough for a car to drive through. I didn't like feeling we were enclosed and going deep under the city, but I imagined when we were done, we could call a cab to pick us up. The tunnel opened up to a busy ferry landing with blue skies and lots of people. I realized I had forgotten my suitcase in the tunnel and ran back up to find it.
Well, I think this dreamer has mentioned in their form where they submitted it that this act of forgetting the suitcase, which I think is very interesting because that's the lysis of the dream. That's where it ends. That's where the conclusion is. You know, she didn't get to the ferry. She didn't go any further. She's got to turn around and go back into the tunnel. And I feel like this is important. One of her family members, her cousin, who has been sick and recovering from cancer, also had a moment in the dream where they were in the tunnel and also lost track of their bag and had to go back in to go grab it. And so she doesn't mention that in this part, but there's a very interesting parallel happening with that end point there, which is this, you know, my suitcase, which is my tools, the things that I need to go about my day, the things you've packed with you, you know, maybe like your conscious tools, the things that you know you have on you, has been left behind. And both the dreamer and the cousin, who can represent some sort of dynamic we'll get into, but has been left in the underground, deep sort of unconscious space that might be represented by the tunnel itself.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that the water is still going. I think it's pretty audible. We'll see after we're done recording. But yeah, somehow it's been going for over an hour now. And into the dream sequence.
Yes, into the dream.
This dream's very interesting. The family aspect is interesting. Family is always a very powerful symbol. Your parents are incredibly powerful symbols in your life. And so when they appear in the dream, there's... Well, it can mean a lot of things.
Sure.
But still, childhood comes up. Maybe a feeling of security. Maybe a feeling of being in that kind of like warm, safe place where your parents are around you. If she had a good relationship with her parents, obviously in someone else's dream, maybe the parents being present isn't as warm and comfortable. But being someplace that... She's 29, so this dream almost makes it sound like she's returned back to a younger time and is traveling. So there's feelings of transition. There's feelings maybe of the ground moving beneath you and forcing you to make changes, but there doesn't feel to be a huge urgency in the dream or stress, maybe. But this traveling to a new place, leaving behind maybe the innocence or safety of the past, traveling through the tunnel especially, like that seems like a pretty obvious symbol of just like going through the womb and being pushed out again to be reborn, and becoming a new person who you're meant to be, growing up, ascending into a way of life that you've been waiting to ascend to maybe for a long time.
The dreamer mentions that when she realizes she didn't have her bag, she starts to feel irritated and impatient with her family, who wanted to discuss, you know, who should go back in the tunnel with her. How are they going to go get the bag? And she knew, I have to go quickly because soon a bunch of people are going to be arriving at the ferry. They're going to come through the tunnel. It's all going to get clogged up. So the dream ego has a sense of how to rectify whatever kind of issue is going on right now, maybe how to gain access back to the tools that feel like they're detached from, that have been lost. I keep saying tools, but I don't know how else to describe what I feel about the suitcase other than like, what do you pack on your person, in your purse, in your camping bag? Like these are your, it's usually useful things that you need. And so I'm just thinking about that symbolically as, the parts of her in regards to whatever situation this is a commentary around, that need to be taken with her, gained, and access for her to move forward through this transition. And not really knowing fully what this dreamer is going through or what transition she's in, there feels like there needs to be a reclaiming of some aspect of those tools, those things that are in her suitcase that she needs to bring with her. And in addition to that, there's like a sort of counterpart, the cousin who is there as well, who also kind of left that thing behind. So Is that a commentary on the cousin? Is it a subjective commentary for herself? Maybe like an inner masculine, sort of feminine masculine that might be going on. Maybe she sees the cousin as some sort of shadow figure that is embodying some sort of qualities. Either way, there has to be a return, maybe a diving kind of deep back into this place, the inner tunnel, to retrieve something that's been left behind and taken with her to the ferry, to this next transitional point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we've actually had a few dreams already on the podcast that are kind of like this, because this is bringing up some deja vu. It's like, didn't I already talk about like someone going through the womb in a different dream?
You might have. I don't recall.
But we're getting a lot of dreams from young women who are probably in transitional, difficult times, and these dreams reflect that. So running back into the tunnel to get the suitcase, there is. Because again, I feel like that I've talked about this in a different dream, but like there's sort of playing with the transition, hesitation perhaps, realizing you're not ready, and then trying to go back in some ways, arriving at where you're meant to be, and suddenly being like, oh my God, I'm not actually prepared to be here. Like I have to go back.
Right.
And dreams are often like this, where we're like, we are traveling somewhere and we arrive at where we're meant to be, and we don't have clothes on. Where it's like, I'm not prepared for this actually somehow. And it's like the unconscious is constantly anticipating how you are not going to succeed in something, or how you're not going to be prepared, or
pointing out some of the flaws in your current conscious attitude, where it's like you're not realizing where you're lacking here. And I think that the like no clothes on kind of thing, or weird clothes, or even things maybe like the suitcase, can be kind of like a commentary on persona, which is like, how am I viewed? How prepared do I seem to other people? Like, what is she trying to move into? How are people going to view how she's stepping into this new light? And are you feeling like you're not prepared when maybe you actually are? Because like you seem quite decisive in the dream, where it's like, I know how to do this actually. Like, I'm gonna just go grab this. It's like, is there a feeling of a lack of confidence, a lack of belief in what she's moving towards? The dream could certainly be a commentary urging her to have better conviction in what she's sensing, and not listening to the kind of like inner figures that are all like squabbling basically about how to get the job done.
Yeah, there's some specific things in this dream that I think are always interesting to point out. The flowers are specifically magnolia.
Yes.
It's like, okay, what does that mean?
Right.
And making necklaces with the flowers, so like daisy chains, is an interesting act. I mean, you can get into like, what do flowers represent archetypically to like all people in some sense, or there is something sort of like innocent about making daisy chains. It's like something that schoolgirls I feel like do.
Just like hippies, like
or
stereotypical.
There's that too.
But there's like a lightness is what I'm trying to get to, innocence, youth, naivety, just kind of like, we can sit here in the green grass and make daisy chains and just enjoy the sun. And there's more of an urgency that's happening in the stream otherwise. So is she exiting out of some period of youth, especially like away from the family, the inner parents that are in this dream, towards a more like, material independence, in inner independence as well, breaking away from like the mother and father, knowing that she can kind of stand on her own 2 feet, because that first scene had the daisy chains and the green grass, but she walks right by that.
Yeah, there's also the tunnel is whitewashed and brightly lit. Yeah, which I think is again sort of an interesting detail, because if the tunnel was just dark, or narrow, it's just black walls or something like that, there would be much more of a feeling of like, I don't know about this. Where am I going? But the fact that it's whitewashed and brightly lit almost makes it seem like it's a tunnel that will be safe to travel through. Right.
I think something that came to mind is like a feeling of like a tunnel as a portal, and especially with it being very brightly lit and whitewashed, there's like this feeling of entering into it, and that sense of like darkness and narrowness that could bring more of like a fear and anxiety are not there. That imagery isn't there. So this feels like a movement of a descent into something that's immediately just pushing her out to where she needs to go. And that sense of that portal, that walking through the door, seems highly interesting to me. Like, where is this transition taking you from?
Yeah.
What is it pulling from you as you move deep underground and then emerge back into the light? You're kind of going deep into the subterranean layer, right, of the earth when you're in a tunnel. But there is a sense of some discomfort that she does, I think, mention in her notes to us, increasing uncomfortableness due to going into the tunnel, but that there was a feeling of this is actually one of many adventures that she's been on, some of which have taken her to skyscrapers or mountains, and right now it's under the tunnel. So it's not as like shadowy and scary and anxiety producing as it could be. It is a kind of threshold, a threshold portal into some sort of development, something that's continuing the hero's journey, you might say.
Yeah, well, I feel like the dreamer is clearly going through a transition.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we always kind of are. And it's like, well, I feel like, like most of these dreams are kind of implying that there's like change happening and there's anxiety around the change. But it does seem like the dreamer ultimately is comfortable, secure, and on the right track.
Yeah.
And that, you know, my interpretation of the dream would be like confirmation of like, you don't exactly know what's going to happen. It's not completely safe, but you're good. And, you know, explore what you're losing, what you're leaving behind, maybe, and just maybe ritualize that a little bit. Like, let it go, honor it, and think about what you stand to gain from this transition, and don't doubt yourself. Do you have a question for us? Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Is there a topic you'd like us to cover?
We want to hear from you. Contact us through the submission form, which can be found at our Instagram page at Golden Shadow Podcast. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can find the link in the description down below.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Golden Shadow Podcast. Thank you.